So welcome again. Today we're hearing about unlocking tax credits for municipal clean energy projects, lessons from modernizing school HVAC systems. If you haven't already, if you can change your Zoom name to include your municipality or affiliation name, that'd be really helpful. We've got some really great speakers today. Sarah Ross, the co-founder from Undaunted K-12, is joining us. Sarah leads a national campaign to help schools make the most of clean energy tax credits. Sarah's on the board of Basic Coalition, is a parent and graduate of Massachusetts Public Schools, so has great perspective, um, and holds a master's in public administration from Harvard Kennedy School. We're also joined by Gabriela Rodriguez from Undaunted K-12. Gabriela is the Network and Engagement Manager, she engages school districts, partners, and allies to advance their mission. Um, in this role, Gabriela supports the implementation of federal energy tax credits, advances climate literacy in Florida schools, and holds a Master's of Environmental Management from Yale University. And last but not least, we're joined by Linda Laporto, the project director at Left Field. Left Field is an owner's project management firm specializing in public sector construction projects across New England. In this role, Linda oversees all phases of a project from conceptualization to construction, works with various project stakeholders, and brings over 2 decades of construction management experience. So very fortunate to have these speakers. In terms of our agenda today, we're gonna have Sarah kick us off and set the stage. Um, and then Gabriella is going to provide an overview of federal energy tax credits and what's the opportunity with ground source heat pumps, um, providing an overview of what is elective pay and recent changes. And then Linda is going to share a case study from Agawam and overview lessons from implementing municipal clean energy projects that leverage those tax credits. Um, and then we're going to open up the floor to Q&A. So with that, I will pass it over to Sarah to kick us off. Stop sharing.
Great. Thanks, Julia.
Ready?
And you were going to launch a poll too, right?
I sure will.
Thanks all for being here today. It's nice to see some familiar faces. I see some real pros in the crowd, so excited to learn from you all too. As Julia said, my name is Sarah. I'm with Undaunted K-12. Yes, we're going to do a quick poll because we want to know what you guys know about ground source heat pumps. That's great. So we're here to learn about tax credits overall, right? Tax credits have been a key piece of the funding puzzle when it comes to clean energy. Tax credits are really the pillar of our US climate policy. They have helped establish and build out our solar and wind industries. And as you'll hear about today from my colleague Gabby, tax credits are now available to municipalities thanks to the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act. Many of you are probably familiar with that. So, our goal today is that you leave here generally aware of how tax credits work for municipalities, what technologies they can still support, and some of the main concepts that you'll need to keep in mind to really help guide your community towards success here. Um, what's most important for us is that you leave here confident enough to open the conversation around these opportunities. And you don't need to be the end all be all subject matter expert to say, hey, I think we should look into this. I think there may be an opportunity here for us. So that's really the bar that we're setting for you all today and for us. Opening this conversation around these tax credits can be very important, right? Every week, Gabby and I speak with folks that could be incorporating tax credits into their work to help pay for this good stuff, but they just don't know about them. And so don't assume that those around you know about these tax credits, or at least don't assume they know the latest. And as we'll talk about, things have certainly shifted. If you are completely new to energy tax credits, just consider this a first learning opportunity. Absorb what you can and know that we and many others have a lot of great resources to support you. If you do have some experience with tax credits, see Beth on the line here, that's great. And know that a good deal has shifted since the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So be open to learning something new today. As with any complex topic where the landscape is shifting quickly, there's a lot of misinformation out there, a lot of confusion. We want to help you and your communities kind of cut through some of that. So again, have an open mind as you listen to today's session and know that we'll be available, in future office hours to dig into more details with you. And the last thing I'll say before we get started is that, we do consider ourselves policy experts on these energy tax credits. and we are not tax professionals. So, we'll do our best to describe the policy and how we see it being implemented in communities across the country. And when you have projects that can claim these tax credits, you will very likely benefit from the help of a tax professional with experience in this specialized area of energy tax credits. So that's my kind of opening framing for our conversation today. I'm looking at the poll and I see that everyone knows something about ground source heat pumps. It seems like some very familiar, some somewhat, and a pretty even spread there. So, you won't need a lot of technical knowledge about this technology. Gabby will give you just kind of the headlines, and we will move on from there. Um, with that, I think I'll pass it over to Gabby to take us away.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Can everyone see my slides? All right. Awesome. Thanks, Julia, for the introduction. We're happy to be here today. Hi, everyone. My name is Gabby. I'm with Undaunted K-12, and as Sarah teed up the stage for me, we're going to talk today about federal energy tax credits and how they are a funding opportunity for clean energy projects in your communities. Afterwards, Linda and Sarah are going to take the stage and bring these ideas that I talk about to life as they talk about a project from a school that is using this funding. So let's get into it. Really briefly here, because we haven't said it yet, I am with Undaunted K-12, so is Sarah, and we are a nonprofit that's working to ensure that every student has the opportunity to attend a safe, healthy, and resilient school. So one of the ways that we do this is by building awareness about federal energy tax credits, which ultimately helps deliver clean energy projects to school buildings across the country. But although as an organization we focus on schools, the funding that I'm about to talk to you about today certainly does not. So I'm going to take a second to set the stage here. To our understanding, many of you are serving communities across the state that have all types of buildings with all different types of organizations that own these buildings. These tax credits are available to all commercial buildings that install eligible clean energy projects. And this includes municipal buildings that you see in the yellow circle, like schools, town halls, public libraries, police stations. And the takeaway here and going into this conversation is that this funding opportunity is available for virtually all buildings in your community. So we're going to talk about how you can deliver those funds or help bring those funds into your community. Okay, so communities are unlocking funding for efficient, healthy, and more resilient infrastructure. How exactly are they doing that? So they are using federal energy tax credits in combination with a funding mechanism called elective pay, which I'll explain in a moment. And this combination essentially unlocks millions or is unlocking millions in funding to improve infrastructure by helping to deliver clean energy technologies to different buildings around the country. So, what exactly are federal energy tax credits? It's important to know first that one, they are non-competitive and uncapped sources of funding. So, by non-competitive, I mean that all entities with qualifying projects are able to claim these credits. And by uncapped, I basically mean unlimited. So, an entity can claim tax credits for multiple projects in a single year and over subsequent years. So, these are not grants, they function very differently. And third, tax exempt entities, like I shared, schools, police stations, and town halls, they receive these dollars as a cash reimbursement. This works through a process called elective pay. The elective pay process has four main steps. The first one is that a project has to be complete and put into use, doing what it's meant to do, supply energy to the building or whatever it is that it's doing. And this is also known as placed in service. Then the entity has to pre-file by submitting information about themselves and their project to the IRS. And important to note here, this has to be done by the entity that actually owns the project. Afterwards, the filer submits proper tax forms to the IRS by their filing deadline. And finally, assuming it's all successful, the IRS sends a paper check to the filer and the entity receives their money. So as Sarah also mentioned, different technologies are governed by different tax credits. Here are some splashed across the screen that we often share about as they're most relevant to buildings. And you'll see at the bottom the different tax credits that support these technologies. But changes were recently made to these tax credits, and what we really want to focus on today and share is that most of these are still available. The one thing I'll say here is that the tax credit for electric vehicles has expired. The rest are still available. They just have changes to their timelines and some have some new rules. So I'm going to quickly highlight a few of those headlines on two sets of technologies here. So first are the tax credits for solar energy projects and thermal/energy storage projects. I'll first talk about timelines of availability. So for solar projects, the credit is available for a shorter time period. Projects now have to be placed in service, that is installed and supplying energy, by the end of 2027. Projects that start construction by July 4th of this year have 4 years to be placed in service. So there is a little bit of an incentive to get, or quite an incentive to start early. For storage projects, the time period that this credit is available for is unaffected, and they still need to start construction by the end of 2035. So that's that on timing. And now I'll move to a different idea, which are these new rules. So both technologies, solar energy projects and thermal and energy storage projects, need to contend with a new set of rules to receive these funds. They are called prohibited foreign entity rules, and they essentially aim to keep federal funds from flowing to foreign countries. So needless to say here, on the solar pieces, the path for solar and storage tax credits is more complex and challenging, but it's possible, and entities can proceed, but should proceed with caution. And then secondly, we wanted to highlight ground source heat pumps. So the credit for this technology has been left fully intact and untouched, unlike the rest. This presents communities a funding opportunity for nearly a decade, and now we're going to get into that. Okay, so what are ground source heat pumps and how can the tax credit help? So it looked like a lot of people on this call had some level of familiarity with ground source heat pumps. So as Sarah said, I'll give mainly the headlines. But ground source heat pumps are a type of modern heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system, or HVAC system for short. These systems keep our buildings comfortable and healthy through a range of outside conditions and temperatures. HVAC systems are often responsible for a majority of a building's energy use. And you'll see here on the top right box a set of legacy HVAC systems. These are not very energy efficient. They burn off fossil fuels, and they can pose risks to people inside of a building. As you look down in the bottom right box, these are modern HVAC systems, and they are highly energy efficient, and so they lower energy costs. They also add reliable cooling, and overall, they contribute to healthier, safer buildings. And so this shift from legacy to modern is what we want to see in our communities. Ground source heat pumps, just a very quick one-on-one on how they work. They use the constant temperature under the ground to support comfortable temperatures above ground. So they're essentially moving heat between the building and the ground. You might also hear these systems referred to as geothermal heat pumps. They are not to be confused with geothermal energy production. That's a different thing. Those are things that produce electricity. And here we're just talking about heating and cooling. So in the summer, the heat is moved from the buildings into the ground. And then in the winter, the heat is harvested from the ground and moved into the buildings. When ground source heat pumps replace boilers, steam heating systems, they eliminate on-site combustion of fossil fuels, and they can be installed in urban and rural areas and incorporated into new construction or retrofitted buildings. Many entities in Massachusetts are implementing this technology for their heating and cooling needs. Here are just a few examples. We've seen schools, universities, even hotels, apartment buildings, and museums are using this technology, and so your community could be next. Okay, and now I'll talk a little bit about how your community can successfully claim the tax credit to make this happen and bring this neat technology into buildings. So let's start with an understanding of the tax credit for ground source heat pumps a bit more. For this technology, the tax credit is called the investment tax credit, and it's also referred to as Section 48. It's available for projects that start construction by the end of 2034, giving entities a relatively long runway to plan ahead and claim this funding. The amount of funds that can be earned are usually about 30% of project costs, but it can be up to 50% depending on some factors that I'll get into. Eligible projects in all locations qualify, and new construction and retrofit projects also qualify for this tax credit. And as I mentioned earlier, elective pay is what allows tax-exempt entities to receive these credits as cash. Okay, so how do you know how big the check will be? How do you plan for how much money you might get here? The credit amount is how much money you earn for the project, and there are three components that essentially go into it. We have the cost basis, the credits, and any adjustments. The cost basis is how much of the project costs are actually eligible for the tax credit. So thinking about how much was the cost of the equipment and what portion of those costs are available for this tax credit. Then the base and the bonus credits make up the credit percentage. That credit percentage is multiplied by the cost basis to give you your credit amount. So how much money you earn for the project from this tax credit. And then important to note, sort of the third factor here is how you paid for the project with other funding sources. That might change the credit amount. So entities can increase their credit amount by meeting additional requirements related to labor, target communities, and domestic content. If projects pay workers federal prevailing wage and employ apprentices, they can meet the PWA provision. If they're located at brownfield sites in communities with coal closures or have like certain unemployment factors, they can meet the energy communities bonus credit. And then if projects use 100% domestic steel and iron and 40% US made manufactured products, they can meet the domestic content bonus credit. Okay, so now we know that there's a base credit and there are ways to increase that credit amount through these three different factors I just explained. So how exactly do they play out? The first thing to know here is that the size of the project matters and kind of sets the stage. So projects under 1 megawatt, as you see to the left, start with a base credit of 30%, and projects over 1 megawatt start with, in theory, a base credit of 6%. These base credits can be increased by meeting the PWA provision, those labor standards I talked about, and then the bonus credits, energy communities and domestic content. They can add up to 50% of the project costs covered. But there are two important notes / flags to point out about project size here. This is where project size really begins to matter. Projects over 1 megawatt have to meet labor standards to increase their base credit to 30% and then increase the bonus credits and then be eligible for the 30 to 50% credit. And then projects under 1 megawatt, as you can see to the left, they don't need to do that. And then secondly, another key requirement for projects over 1 megawatt is that if they are starting construction in 2026, they have to meet domestic content to receive any credit amount at all. So as you can see, what's important for you all to know is that whether a project is under or over 1 megawatt really affects like what requirements they need to meet to get the most out of this tax credit. Okay, as I mentioned, credit amounts can also be adjusted by the IRS depending on how else you funded a project. Massachusetts has state grants for this technology, so it's important to know how those funds could affect the tax credit amount. The first thing to know here is that grants do not reduce the cost basis of the tax credit. So you see in this example to the right, let's take a $10 million project cost, for example. It receives a 30% credit. And so the tax credit is estimated to be about $3 million. We also know that the project is being funded locally with $5 million, with the utility rebate at $2 million, and then as we just described, that estimated tax credit at $3 million. The important thing to understand here is that the cost basis is not changing with the incorporation of a grant. The tax credit still remains at $3 million estimated. Okay, so now we're moving to a different idea. Now, if a grant makes it so that the total project funds exceed project costs, the IRS will reduce the credit amount. This is to avoid contributing what is called excess benefit, so additional funds over the necessary project costs. The cost basis remains the same as I just discussed when a grant comes in, but the credit amount is reduced. So in this same example on the right, you'll see same project cost, 10 million, a 30% tax credit, estimated to get a tax credit of 3 million. And let's say there's no local funds coming in, but there's a state grant coming in of $9 million. And then, as we discussed, the federal tax credit is estimated to be 3 million. The 9 million from the state grant and the 3 million from the tax credit add up to $12 million. That is an excess benefit that's $2 million over our $10 million project. So because of that, the IRS will reduce the tax credit by $2 million, resulting in a $1 million tax credit. Okay, and finally, when it comes to adjustments, I'll just share that if a project is funded with tax-exempt bonds, the IRS will also reduce the credit amount up to 15%. There's a link in this slide that explains how exactly that percentage is calculated. This is known as a haircut reduction. So on the example to the right, same numbers here, tax-exempt bonds are funding the project, and we see that the federal tax credit of $3 million is reduced by 15% to $2.55 million. All right, so as Sarah mentioned, this tax credit can make this the most cost-effective decision when a building is choosing an HVAC system, especially when it's stacked alongside other funding sources. On the right is an example from a school in Massachusetts that combined funding sources to fund their ground source heat pump project. And with these opportunities, the technology came out cheaper up front than a gas boiler. So I'm just going to quickly run through some state funding sources that can support these projects. Mass Save provides a utility incentive for this technology. For schools, the Massachusetts CEC Green Schools Work program offers funding for installing clean energy projects like this, and the Massachusetts School Building Authority Heat Pump Retrofit program offers funding specifically for heat pumps. The Department of Energy Resources has the Green Communities Division that provides not only grants but also technical assistance to help municipalities with clean energy projects. And then lastly, this isn't a funding opportunity, but the Federal Funds and Infrastructure Office offers technical assistance specifically to entities that want to claim these federal tax credits. All right, another way that entities can fund projects and unlock these tax credits is through something called energy savings performance contracting. We don't have time to get into this today, so I'll leave you with two examples or two resources. One is an example from Hopkinton Public Schools that employed this method, and the other is a blog post we recently put out that explains this strategy in plain language. So it's a good place to start if you don't know a ton about this. And in a few weeks, Northampton Sustainability Director will talk about their ground source heat pumps project at a school and how they aim to stack state funds and the tax credit, as we just talked about, for their project. So if that interests you, you can learn more by attending that next Climate Resilient Schools Coalition meeting. And then finally, I'm going to leave you all with some concrete ways that you can think about helping your communities unlock these dollars. First, understand these concepts, these requirements, these processes, and where opportunity lies. So how the tax credit works, what elective pay is, the fact that the ground source heat pump tax credit is untouched. You can be the person that knows these basics and brings this up in your communities at the right time. Raise awareness about these funds with your community and project teams. So when you hear about an eligible clean energy project or a new building that's going up, a building that's being renovated, and these clean energy technologies are going to be considered, definitely bring these tax credits as a funding opportunity to the table. Have resources ready that you can share on hand to provide more details and support. Like we said, it's not necessary to know every little thing, but being able to know the basics, bring this up, and then have the right resources for more information and direct support to projects will really assist building owners in your communities that are trying to implement these projects and maximize the tax credits. So there's a ton of guidance out there. There are tools, and I went over some opportunities for technical assistance. Connect with peers that have pursued tax credits for similar projects. So it's likely that they would be able to share experiences, tips, and hopefully success stories that you can then talk about with others to show that this is a proven opportunity in your region. They might also know of private sector partners that are the most experienced and helpful in navigating this process. And then finally, you can also all help bridge what we often see, the communication and alignment gap between key project stakeholders to help make sure that these requirements are met. So, for example, stakeholders on project teams like tax advisors, finance teams, engineers, architects, they may not all be on the same page or level of awareness about the tax credit and the requirements that are necessary, and that can cause issues and lead to not a successful claim. So you can be the person that helps to bridge that knowledge and communication gap. And with that, I will hand it off to Linda and Sarah, who are going to bring what I've shared with you to life.
Great. Thank you, Gabby.
Thank you.
Hope that was helpful for folks. Linda, thank you so much for being here today. I know you're busy making these projects happen across the Commonwealth, so we appreciate you taking some time to share your experience. I know you've become the guru of all things energy tax credits for ground source at left field, and so we're just so pleased that you're coming to talk to this group. So thank you so much for your time.
Happy to be here. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah. So let's get into it. Yeah. So tell us briefly about the firm that you work for and the role that you play in municipal capital projects.
Okay. Yes, so I'm Linda Laporto, and I work for an OPM firm called Left Field. There's no baseball reference there, just that we like to think outside the box. Therefore, we might sound like we're out in the left field sometimes. So what we do as an owner project manager, we represent the district or the owner, and we assist the entire team to help manage all the different parts and pieces of what makes a project, all the way from starting up with creating the teams, getting the architects, design teams on board, helping understand the project, build the project in theory, in paper, and then taking it all the way through all the different stages of documentation, budgeting, scheduling, and hopefully also all the way through construction, and then eventually closing out these projects, and hopefully also being able to assist in taking advantage of some of these wonderful tax incentives that are out there.
Great, great. Thank you. So you're here to share some of the lessons you've learned from helping Agawam, but you have your hands in lots of projects. I don't know how you do it all. Um, so tell us a little bit about this Agawam project. That's, a new school construction project and incorporating ground source heat pumps.
Yep. So Agawam High School is a wonderful project that we've been working on from conception back in 2022, actually. And it is a new construction high school, although we are reusing a small portion of the existing building. So it's a three-phased project, if you will. It's about 234,000 square feet. It's a two-story building where we have two different wings, as you'll see in the picture, which is a rendering of what is actually under construction right now, where we have a community wing with a gym, cafeteria, auditorium, and then we have an academic wing that contains all the classrooms and office spaces. And then there's also a pre-K building, which is utilizing the existing foundations from one of the old manufacturing wings of the existing school. So Agawam High School is, believe it or not, currently the largest one-story high school in the Commonwealth. It is over 200,000 square feet large in one story, spread out over this beautiful farmland with great fields. But it just presents a unique set of challenges. It was built in 1952, so it is very inefficient from all the different standpoints, all the way from energy to education and safety and security and all of the above.
Great, great. So what I want folks to hear from what Lynn says, like, this is a big project. We went back to the 1 megawatt discussion. This is one of those big 1 megawatt projects. You've got multi phases. So this is about as complex as it gets, is what I want people to take away from that. So, we'll come back to the particulars of Agawam, but let's just start by talking generically about how municipal building projects happen. Think about that process, that could be happening in any, the folks on the call here, any of their communities, whether it's a new library, a new police station, a new community center. But let's think about this process through the lens of how we're going to kind of stitch in this ground source heat pump technology that requires some kind of new steps. And then with it, right, unlocking that tax credit opportunity and the new steps we have to do there. So you've got this great flow chart to help us see what's happening at various stages to layer in this technology. So let's kind of dive in here. So when a community is building a new building, like you said, that project team gets formed, architect, representatives of the community. There's an initial feasibility exercise that is basically just asking, can we kind of build something sort of that's going to meet the needs that we've outlined, at this site? We pass through that stage and then we start to get serious about design and what we call schematic design. So is this the stage where ground source heat pumps would need to be put on the table? Like, who's placing this HVAC option on the table? Like, what does the community do to explore at this stage? Talk to us about that, what's important at this stage in the game.
Sure. So it is the schematic design is really where it's the best place and really the only place to start introducing this into the conversation. It's becoming a more prominent discussion or more item of discussion, and it in more recent years because of just the general code upgrades and difficulties with utilizing any other type of heat source. And just the fact that a lot of buildings are lacking cooling, which is another big piece of that puzzle. So typically it gets introduced into the conversation through the design teams, the engineers, and when you start talking the schematic design piece, that is really where this conversation needs to start. And the big piece of using a ground source heat pump system, and especially if you're using geothermal systems, this becomes a very, very big and important step to start talking about early on. Typically, what you need to have done is establish a team and a timeline to do a test well, because the test well is really what's going to review what your soil conditions are on the site and really what makes this happen, how much it's going to build the amount of information that you need to generate any estimates for the installation and life cycle costs, the final design and just how large the system needs to be, the layout of the field, which plays into the layout of buildings and on a site and the project itself. And so it requires a lot of information. You basically have to figure out what's underground and how is this going to help you design the system for this building or for this project.
Yeah. And so hearing all that, obviously that comes with a cost, right? So unlike other HVAC options where we don't have to do all this exploration of the site, we don't have to dig this test well. Here we do have to do more work up front to kind of unlock this technology. So, how do we pay for those? I mean, they're not huge dollars in the context of a new building, right? But they are tens of thousands of dollars, not hundreds, not millions, but they are tens of thousands. So how do we pay for that?
Yeah, so they can, believe it or not, they can range up to about $100,000 to do
Okay.
a test well, depending on what your conditions are. And so what we recommend from an OPM standpoint is to utilize the appropriated feasibility study budgets that you have for a project. Now, having said that, not a lot of them have $100,000 sitting around in the budget to just utilize for this. So there's other grant programs similar to what Gabby actually just spoke about earlier. There are Green School Works, the technical assistance, and the Federal Funds and Infrastructure Office Technical Assistance Program actually has a grant program where you can get help to fund a test well specifically
Right.
for the purpose of that design.
Yeah, great. So, take us into like, how do you see communities making this decision around HVAC system choice? And, is this where the tax credits are getting introduced? You mentioned life cycle cost analysis. Who's typically bringing tax credits to the table? How do you see that happening? And I imagine it's maybe different today than it was 2 years ago when this was really brand spanking new, but how's it kind of working?
Yeah, so because it is a fairly new idea, it hasn't really come up in a lot of conversations before. So for me, from an OPM standpoint, it's really become our job to, as managers of budget, to advise the district and the clients on what else is out there. And so it's become a big piece for us to mention early on in the process that this is really something that that can help determine what you're going to do with your building and how it's going to be designed,
Yeah.
including also, of course, how much it's going to cost.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something, we work nationally and we see this, that it's like, it's no one's job to bring this tax credit to the table. You've taken it on because you had this experience and, I'm sure your clients really appreciate it. But in general, bring tax credits in the conversation is in no one's job description. So, all the energy managers on this call, they can think about that as part of my job is to make sure that this gets talked about again, open the conversation. Because so often we've seen engineers lay out the options, lay out that life cycle cost analysis, and not include the tax credits, which, if it's 40 to 50% of the cost, guess what? That totally changes the story, right? Think about that graph that Gabby showed with, once you get those tax credits in there, cheaper than a gas boiler. If you don't include the tax credits, you miss that story completely. So, what happens if we miss the opportunity to talk about ground source tax credits at the schematic design stage? Can we go back? What happens if we miss schematic design, like the opportunity to talk about it then?
Well, as with every construction project, timelines are very, very tight. So the short answer, it has to be brought up at that stage, or you're going to have to backtrack your design, which is going to
Painful.
inevitably could cause timelines, which cost money.
Yeah.
So it's really it should really be brought up at the beginning of and be part of the original discussion.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So if I'm an energy manager and I want, to make sure that my community is taking advantage of this ground source heat pump wherever it can, I think I'm having eyes on where all the HVAC end of life kind of situations that are emerging and having eyes on all of those so that, we're bringing this into the conversation early and not missing that schematic design phase. Okay, great.
Yeah.
So let me move us forward here because I do want to get to questions. Let's fast forward. The community selects ground source for the project as Agawam did. The project secures the funding it needs to proceed. Gabby, let's go back to the flow chart for a second. So we get through to we go to like detailed design now, right? Now we're really digging in. We're refining the solutions. What's important at this stage in terms of the ground source heat pumps and the tax credits there?
So you guys mentioned it in your presentation earlier. There are specialized tax attorneys and teams that work specifically with the tax credits, and they help with that application process, because what is becoming very, very critical is that a lot of this documentation to meet the criteria in order to get those larger tax credits, they have to be worked into the engineering documents. They have to be worked into the bidding documents,
Yeah.
and ultimately have to be reviewed during the construction, all the way throughout to the end where you would have them also do your actual tax filing. So
Yeah.
it's important to know this, and it kind of ties into the same timeline of schematic design, because usually you work right from schematic design right into the detailed design.
Right.
And those specifications now, for especially if it's a larger system over the 1 megawatt, you have to have those documents included in the specifications for the wage rates, the apprenticeship programs, the domestic content, and then those have to be included in the bid documents that go out. And then they get reviewed during construction to make sure that you're remaining in compliance and that you're meeting all those goals and then some,
Yeah.
so that you're able to take advantage of the full reimbursement at the end.
Yeah, yeah. So kind of, a situation we would want to avoid is we're going along just fine. We're excited about this tax credit. We're doing ground source. We kind of tip over 1 megawatt in that detailed design and no one catches it because no one has eyes on it. We go out to bid. We don't communicate with our contractors that they're going to need to pay federal prevailing wage, hire apprentices, and boom, suddenly now, right, we've undermined our ability to maximize that tax credit, going back to Gabby's point of like 30 goes down to 6, or it can go to 0 if we don't do domestic content, right? So having eyes on this 1 megawatt through that detailed design, kind of critical. Okay, and you kind of talked about bidding and working that in. So let's move forward to construction. we're in that phase now. We have teams digging up that well field. What needs to happen during this process to set communities up for success kind of down the line with the tax credit filing process?
Yeah, so once this process is started, once you've moved through that detailed design, it's a lot of reviewing and just following through with the documentation, making sure that all the teams are involved. It falls heavily on the OPM to make sure that all the documents are reviewed and that they're actually following through with all these specifications, right? So that's where the tax attorney becomes really, really helpful. There are some out there that are actually more helpful even from a construction side of view, so they understand what parts and pieces, but basically it's going through everything and just continuously reviewing all the documentation to make sure that the subcontractors and the contractors are following through, making sure that the documentation that they're submitting is also documented the right way so that you're not going back and trying to backtrack later on once it comes
Sure.
time to file for the so the documents really they have to follow along in the whole process from day one.
Yeah, great. Okay, so big message here. Don't fall in the trap of thinking that you only hire the tax professional for the tax filing, that last step on your chart. We really want them all the way at the beginning, and some of them even will redline designs to kind of help guide towards an easier, more streamlined process. Great. I'm mindful of time here, so I'm going to let's move forward and just put up on the screen the AGWAM timeline that Linda put together, just so people can see kind of the dates of how things have unfolded in AGWAM. I'm just going to kind of summarize a few big ideas, and then we can kind of, move open to Q&A. So, big ideas here. I heard from you, Linda, put together a team that is equipped with kind of experience, information, resources to consider ground source heat pumps and this tax credit opportunity. This is likely to include a tax professional early on in the process. Be prepared to do more work up front. Ground source heat pump requires it. It's a better solution, but we got to do more up front, right? And we'll need to have some pre-development dollars to get that extra work up front done. And then over 1 megawatt projects really require special attention, and that work and attention needs to start before you bid the project. And it certainly continues, during the construction phase, to kind of document worker stuff and material stuff. So I think those are the big ideas I heard there. Thank you so much. I'm sure folks will have questions. But it's so valuable for you to share your knowledge and your experience, which is just, I'm sure this group will put it to good use. So thank you so much for being here.
Sure. Thank you
Julia,
for
what do you
having me.
think? Should we open it up to questions?
I think it's time. And I also want to reiterate that thank you so much. This was like such a great presentation, and you guys distilled a lot of really complex information into really fabulous slides. So just want to say thank you again for your time and all the great insights. And in our last 13 minutes, want to open it up to any questions, reflections, comments. Yeah, Ben, you want to jump in?
Yeah. So I have a really quick question about compliance. So we're on a project that's kind of moving along. We're in the design phase. We've got our test well being done right now. Should be finished right now, drilling. And so we had back before Trump, we were in a different project that required many of the same sort of documentation, the prevailing wage and and all of that, the U.S. Made stuff. But because it was a block grant from the state, they provided a software for us. It sucked, but it was a tracking software. And so my question for you, Linda, I guess for Linda, is there something for us that we can use? Because I know we have to track, especially apprentice hours, like every week. And I'm just worried about that falling through the cracks if we don't have some sort of software.
Yes, that's a very good question, Ben. And unfortunately, the only system that I'm aware of that would actually work for that is a very knowledgeable OPM. There is no, and we don't get the benefits of any software related to our role, just because we're involved in so many different facets of the project that there really is nothing for us to sort of just feed everything into. Believe me, I've looked.
Yeah. Okay.
And so it becomes a big piece of our puzzle as an OPM to manage that. And so I'm on projects like the Agawam project, for instance. I I gather the reports from the certified payroll every week from all the subcontractors. They email them to me, and then I keep them in a file, and then all of that goes to the tax attorney for filing at the end of the project. And we've been able to do a lot of the prep work by having like the schedule of values on the pay recs show exactly what we need to track, so that it's making it easier. But all of that really becomes more important to have it included in your bid documents, so that the subcontractors are already expecting it. And then it's just, for us, it's a matter of having to tell them, where does it go.
Thanks, Linda. Let's go to Chris and then Eliza.
Hello. Thanks for this great presentation. Really cool. In Truro, we are designing a new public works building it's all designed, it's gonna have geothermal. It's on the town meeting warrant, which is next week, and who knows if it's gonna pass, probably not. But this presentation did make me realize we've been saying we're gonna get $1 million in mass save rebates, but I'm not actually sure that we're saying anything about the tax credit. So I'm gonna go back in there. Maybe it'll make it $1 million cheaper, which will be nice.
Be great.
I have two questions. One's quick, one's bigger. So there's a 10% adder for domestic content. Is that right? I've been working with with a big solar array here, and domestic content is a total headache. But with ground source heat pumps, is domestic content pretty easy? Are we making ground source heat pumps here?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that, and then Linda, if you have thoughts too. So yeah, the supply chain for ground source heat pumps is very different than solar, because we make them in Oklahoma and we make them in Indiana, water furnace, climate master. So yes, when you talk to mechanical engineers, they go, yeah, we make all this stuff here. Totally, conceptually, the way that we meet domestic content, the way they wrote the law, the manufacturers have to reveal their direct manufactured cost, which of course they don't want to do, because that would reveal their profit margin. So there is a rub there, and tax professionals, have strategies that they are willing to help clients with and stand behind from an audit perspective, but you kind of got to squint a little. Because the manufacturers are not giving us the data necessarily we need. I don't know, Linda, how are you guys? And sorry, one last thing I'll say is domestic content is both a carrot and a stick. If you are under 1 megawatt, it is a carrot, extra 10%. Going back to Gabby's slide, if you are over 1 megawatt and you don't meet domestic content, you get 0. Big stick. So under 1 megawatt, carrot, over 1 megawatt, big stick. Linda, do you want to add on anything there?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. One of the biggest issues is documentation for that. So again, highlighting how important it is to have this be part of the original bid documents, because we have this conversation all the way back to bidding when we de-scope the subcontractors, so that they're already aware that they need to supply this documentation. And if they supply the documentation up front that specifies that this is manufactured in the United States, then that has taken the lift off of, 2 years later, having to go back to all of them and trying to get that documentation. And now it's going to reveal what their profit margins are, and then becomes more of a difficult conversation. But by putting it in from day one, it's just part of the specifications. It's part of the submittals. It becomes less of an issue.
Okay, I'll get on that.
Yes, definitely.
Second question, if I can ask, that is more general. So solar and batteries are getting cheaper over time. All other construction getting more expensive over time. I'm wondering what the long-term ground source heat pump world is like. Is it going to get cheaper over time as there's more contractors? And then sort of related to that, we thought the tax credit for solar was going to go out to 2034, and it didn't. Why didn't the Trump administration touch ground source heat pumps, and how confident are we that this is going to be here until 2034?
Yeah, maybe I'll take that second one first, and then of course you'll have to remind me of the first one. So yeah, I think there's some interesting dynamics around the ground source tax credit. In general, this administration is supportive of geothermal, headline. they may not know as much about heat pumps. And mechanically, what happened here is solar and energy storage got moved over to this new tech neutral tax credit, 48 capital E, and ground source heat pumps got left behind in this little, the legacy tax credit that we had for solar, section 48. And so mechanically, what happened when Congress was looking for pay-fors for the One Big Beautiful Bill Act is they looked at kind of where all the big dollars, right? They're looking for how do we pay for, our tax cuts, and they saw a big number associated with that solar tax credit, the tech neutral tax credit, and the ground source heat pump tax credit 48 had almost no dollars associated with it, meaning it's peanuts, don't bother. And so they just kind of left it alone and really focused on hammering this new tech neutral tax credit that contains solar energy storage. So, it's a mix of factors. I talked to the geothermal industry folks earlier this week, and they said, yeah, and we were there in Washington doing a lot of work. So it has been through the ringer, and we're not legislating on tax credits right now. I think the next time we would expect to legislate on tax credits would, be kind of post post a new presidential election. So I don't see that coming up again. The Republicans have kind of taken the swing they were going to take at it. And now you have to remind me of the first question, or your second of the three.
Yeah. But question about, are they going to get cheaper over time or more expensive?
Oh, ground source. Yeah. So, I mean, so much of ground source heat pumps, and those of you that are doing retrofits in buildings especially, it's like every building's a snowflake. The work here is like improving our buildings, replacing our distribution systems. And so it's like this is very bespoke work, and so I think maybe the widget's getting cheaper, but so much of this is labor. So much of this is, the messiness of building improvements. It's very different than solar, which is kind of this homogenized product that comes off the pallet and gets slapped to a roof, right? There's many more economies of scale there. We are dealing with messy buildings when we think about ground source. So we're not going to see, I don't think, the same, maybe some innovations around digging and drilling, and I won't pretend to be an expert there. All right, I'll stop talking so we can take another question. Thanks, Chris. Great questions.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eliza. Before you jump in and we start losing folks, I also just wanted to mention, I know I got a couple questions if we're going to be sending the slides out after we will be sending the slides. And for the participants of the Municipal Energy Sustainability Managers Academy, MESM, our next peer learning network meeting that's happening on May 20th, we're actually going to have folks from Undaunted K-12 join us and can continue to ask, or you can continue to ask questions in that space. So just wanted to flag that we'll have a continued opportunity to carry on this conversation. All right, over to you.
Thank you. This is so relevant to us in Brockton. In particular, Left Field is our OPM right now. So thank you, Left Field, for all the work you do. Kevin is incredible. But I just want everyone to know we actually, our Representative Plouffe has filed a legislative amendment, because while the MSBA could potentially fund up to 80% of the under the current policy for construction of our new school, it does not allow Brockton to benefit from any incentives. And so when we look at energy incentives, right, we need to bring the MSBA with us. And so I say this because in real time, we have a legislative amendment right now that is asking for Brockton to be able to receive incentives beyond that, because for what that means for us, that's $10 to $20 million. Otherwise, we just don't get it. And so I don't know if this group can mobilize to get behind that, to explain, and maybe support our legislators doing the work. But I mean, I'm going to the State House tomorrow to talk to some folks. Our Senator Brady, he's the vice chair of the Joint Committee on Utilities and Energy, and we have a strong delegation from Brockton. But I just think that's something really important, that when we think about this, that we need to bring the MSBA on board with us, because there's incentives, but we're not eligible. So that's $20 million we just can't get, simply because the MSBA has said no more incentives.
Yeah, I'm totally with you, Eliza, and totally support that work and think it's really critical to adjust that. I do want to clarify, not to undermine, but I do want to clarify that the MSBA did issue a third-party funding policy, several Junes back. It's not going to help you, but what it says is when you get a tax credit dollar in, we don't reduce the basis on which we calculate our share, says the MSBA. So effectively, all those dollars for folks that aren't maxed out, right? You're hitting that issue because you are maxed out at 80%. But if I'm a 50% reimbursement community, all those tax credits will flow towards my local share and does not reduce the basis on which the MSBA calculates its share. You are in that situation because of your where you are in terms of your reimbursement rate. And I agree that we need to fix it, but I just want everyone else to just understand that they may be in a different situation based on their own reimbursement rate if they're not maxing out.
Yeah.
Right. And 80% is the most, and we're there, but we need more.
I totally get it. I'm with you.
Absolutely. I would fully support that as well. I feel your pain. And like Sarah said, unfortunately, you're at that max, whereas other projects like the Ag One project, they're only at about 47%. So they're able to take care to really benefit from that IRA reimbursement. So it becomes big dollars. I mean, we're looking at somewhere between $5 and $6 million of contribution that just comes in at the end of the project that is not applicable to the MSBA reimbursement program whatsoever. So
if anyone wants to support, tell your legislators to support this amendment, because it could be your school that gets capped at 80%.
Do we have time for one last one from Ellen here, or what do you think, Julia?
Yeah, Ellen can be our last question, and then I'll hand it over to Undaunted to close this.
Okay, I'll try to be quick. Does anyone have experience? And I apologize, I joined late, so I hope it's not already discussed. Has people had experience with the apprentice requirements and contractors bidding on jobs that have these requirements and and compliance with it? Thanks.
Linda, I think that's you.
Yeah, so we are working with that requirement on one of our projects. One of them is under the 1 megawatt, so it's not a requirement as much, doesn't become as much of a requirement, but especially when it comes to the geothermal systems, most of the geothermal well drilling companies and installers have established programs just because this has become such a big piece of the puzzle. And it's become a requirement. So a lot of the companies actually have their own apprenticeship programs so that they're able to meet those requirements very easily. But again, it goes back to having those conversations early on in the process, during the specifications and bid process, making sure that you're really selecting vendors that can actually meet those requirements.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Well, I won't take up, I know we're only already a minute over, so I just want to thank Julia and her team for inviting us to have this conversation. Look forward to continuing it with many of you at office hours. If you want to ping us with more questions, and please check out our website. We have, we were filling the chat with lots of goodies. Gabby, you want to hop in and do a quick what we got here?
Yeah, I will be hyper speed quick. We have an Energy Tax Credit Schools hub that has a bunch of resources on tax credits and elective pay. I know I said we focus on schools, but a lot of the information we cover is relevant and the same for all tax exempt entities. So it may be really helpful regardless. We have videos, presentations, and then also just wanted to share 3 quick resources specifically on ground source heat pumps and generally this tax credit opportunity we discussed. We have a report on modern HVAC systems, what they are, fostering a shared language with people in your community, and a digestible one-pager about the ground source heat pump tax credit that you can share with others. And we're currently working on a guide to do exactly what we were just talking about. How do we maximize this tax credit for projects? And so stay tuned to our website for that. And thanks, everybody. I dropped in the chat also our email addresses. You have questions, and we'll be here on the May 20th, I believe, office hours, where we can chat more about this.
Thanks all so much. When I email the slides out, I'll make sure to include all the links that you guys put in the chat as well.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Take care, all. Thanks so much.